Hello everyone. Today we will be learning about what a space advantage is in chess, why it is important, and how we should react when we have a space advantage and also when our opponent has a space advantage. In chess, having a space advantage means that you control more squares than your opponent does, and you also have more freedom to move around than your opponent does. Usually, we can determine this visually by just looking at the chessboard. Let's look at the position in front of us for an example. Here, white has a space advantage over black, and we can conclude this by just looking at the position. White's pawns are much more advanced than black's, and this gives white more freedom to move his pieces around. This is why a space advantage is important. In this position, black is extremely cramped, and he has trouble deciding where he wants to put his pieces. For example, it is extremely hard for black to try to develop his pieces. His bishop on f8 is currently being blocked by his knight on e7, so he can't move out, and his bishop on c8 isn't doing much better. Here, the black bishop on c8 only has 2 squares to move to. It can only move to the b7 and d7 squares, because if it tries to move to the a6 square, white can win the bishop for free. Similarly, black's knights don't have many squares to move to. Right now, black's knight on c6 is blocking his knight on e7, because black's knight on e7 would like to move to the c6 square, but he already has a piece occupied on that square. He also doesn't have many squares for his knights. For example, this knight on c6 can't really move anywhere. All the possible forward moves black has for the c6 knight are all being controlled by white because he has a space advantage. Unlike black, who has a space disadvantage, white's pieces don't get in the way of each other because white has a space advantage. And this is once again the advantage of having a space advantage. When you have a space advantage like white does, your opponent is extremely cramped and is just simply uncomfortable for them to play. Because of this crampedness, if you have a space disadvantage, you want to trade your pieces. This will lessen the amount of pieces you have, so it will be easier to move your pieces around and therefore also less likely that your pieces will get in the way of each other. For example, in this position, black has a space disadvantage, so he will want to trade his pieces. Therefore, black should capture the knight on d2 with his knight on e4. And by doing so, black trades a pair of knights, and this will leave him of discomfort. Conversely, if you have a space advantage, you don't want to trade pieces because you want to keep pressure and discomfort on your opponent. For this reason, if it was white to move in this position instead of black to move, white should try to avoid the trading of knights. So, here, white should play something along the lines of moving his knight to f3. And this keeps the knights on the board, and it remains difficult for black to play. Let's look at some examples to make sure we understand the concept of space advantages. In this position, if black decides to move his knight to f6, where should white go? Pause the video and I will reveal the solution in 3 seconds. Here, white should push his pawn forward, which allows him to gain more space right at the start of the game. If we decide instead to passively defend the pawn with a knight on c3, we miss this opportunity to gain space, and black can play e5, and next move, we no longer have the opportunity to gain space. So after we play e5, black has to move his knight to d5 basically, and after this, white can once again gain space by pushing his pawn forward, this time to c4. And this once again attacks black's knight, so black has to move his knight away again. And when he does so, we can once again push a pawn forward and gain more space. So, as you can see, right out of the opening 4 moves into the game, white already has amassed a space advantage by moving his pawns forward. And compared to black's position, white has much more freedom to move and develop his pieces, while for black, it remains questionable for how he should proceed. Let's move on to the next example. Here, white is at a space disadvantage. Where should he play? Pause the video and I will reveal the solution in 3 seconds. Since white is more cramped than black, white wants to trade pieces, so he should move his g5 knight to e4 here. By doing so, black is forced to exchange one of his pieces, and this is once again beneficial to us because we are currently at a space disadvantage. Right now, next move, we would like to trade a pair of knights. So, if black tries to avoid this because he has a space advantage, we can instead capture the bishop on d6, and this once again trades a pair of pieces, which is in our favor because we were at a space disadvantage. And by doing so, we have accomplished our goal of trading pieces. Let's look at the final example. White is currently at a space advantage, so how should he proceed? Pause the video and I will reveal the solution in 3 seconds. This is actually a very challenging problem. Here, since white has a space advantage, we don't want to trade any of our pieces. And for that reason, we want to prevent our opponent from being able to make a piece exchange. Next move, black would like to move his bishop from g7 to h6, and this makes sense for black because he has a space disadvantage. So, by doing so, he would be able to successfully trade a pair of pieces. And we don't want that. So, to prevent this idea, we want to move our queen to c1. And this is quite a difficult move to find. In this position now, black can no longer move his bishop to h6, because if he does, we win a piece for free. So therefore, we have successfully prevented a piece exchange and have maintained our space advantage. Congratulations on solving these problems. To wrap up today's lesson, let's go over what we learned. In chess, you have a space advantage if you control more squares than your opponent does, and are also able to move more freely. When you have a space advantage, you don't want to trade pieces, and conversely, if you're at a space disadvantage, you do want to trade your pieces. That's all for today. Thank you all for watching.